This computer right here cost me $30 on eBay, and today I'm going to show you what it's actually capable of, plus how spending just a little more money can turn it into a machine that runs modern games. I'll even show you how it's possible to fit a high-end graphics card into this tiny case. At first glance, it looks like a boring office PC, and honestly, that's exactly what it was back in 2014. But now it's 2026, and somehow this thing ended up in my hands, which means it's time to turn it into a budget gaming sleeper. And trust me, upgrading a cheap office PC like this is basically survival mode. Tiny case, weak power supply, weird proprietary connectors, one wrong part, and the whole build is dead. But that's what makes this fun. So the real question is, how far can we actually push this thing? Within the budget and within the physical limits of this case. Let's find out. This machine is a Dell Optiplex 7020. Yep, a classic pre-built Dell, designed to save space above all else. You can find tons of these all over eBay. Pop the side panel off, and honestly, it's tight, like lunchbox tight. There's basically one single spot where a GPU can go, and it only fits low-profile, super short cards. So if you already own a full-size GPU and don't want to sell it just to downsize, yeah, I ran straight into that same problem. But don't worry, I've got a workaround. I'll show you in a bit. For now, let's take a quick tour inside. First thing I notice, 8 GB of DDR3 RAM. Not bad, that's at least usable in 2026. Storage though, not great. There's no modern drive installed, just an old DVD drive hanging in there like it's 2012. Power-wise, things get even more limiting. There's only one SATA power connector, no extras. And on the motherboard, no M.2 slot at all. So yeah, if I want to add a more than one SSD, this system is already fighting me. This PC is compact, efficient, and extremely uncooperative when it comes to upgrades. With today's parts prices, building a brand new PC under $100 is basically impossible, unless you're not gaming at all. So the smarter move? Buy an old pre-built and upgrade it. And honestly, it's way easier than most people think. The first step is simple. Look for used pre-built PCs or old workstations. These machines were mass-produced, they're cheap on the used market, and most importantly, they give you a solid foundation to work with. From there, you just need to be a bit strategic. Not every pre-built is upgrade-friendly, so you want to keep a few key things in mind to avoid painting yourself into a corner later. CPU choice is especially important. If you're not sure which older CPUs are still worth using, there are actually some great ranking lists out there that break down older processors by real-world performance. I'll drop a helpful reference link in the description, so you don't have to guess. Bottom line, you don't need to build from scratch to build smart. Sometimes the best budget gaming PC starts life as a boring office box. Alright, let's see what we're actually working with here. I drop in an SSD just to test the system. Plug in the power, and boom, the fan spins up immediately. That's already a good sign. At least we know this thing is alive. Inside, we've got an Intel Core i5-4590. 4 cores, 4 threads, 3.3 GHz base clock, boosting up to 3.7 GHz. Back in its day, this CPU was everywhere. Offices, schools, gaming PC, you name it. It was basically the go-to sweet spot CPU for years. Performance-wise, it still holds up surprisingly well for its age. Nothing crazy by today's standards, but definitely not dead weight either. So now comes the real question. How does this old workhorse actually perform in games today? Let's load up some games and find out. Starting with Minecraft, this CPU only manages about 30 FPS at 8 chunks, 1080p. Already a rough start. Then in GTA 5, it gets even worse, around 10 FPS, which is basically unplayable. And CS2, it doesn't even make it into the match. Even with everything set to low, the system runs out of steam before the game can properly load. You can literally see the RAM getting maxed out just trying to enter the game. With the Intel HD 4600 integrated graphics, this system just can't hang with modern games. If we want it to actually game, it needs a real GPU. But here's the problem. How do you fit a full-size graphics card into a case this cramped? And it gets worse. The stock power supply is only 255 watts, and there's no PCIe power cable for a GPU. So that immediately limits our options. That means we're basically shopping in one category. GPU that don't need external power. Cards that run entirely off the PCIe slot. And honestly, that's the safest route anyway. These GPUs usually have low power draw. They're designed for OEM systems like this, and they won't turn your tiny Optiplex into a space heater. Could you run a higher power card with a second PSU? Sure, But that's messy, bulky, and way less reliable, and it kind of defeats the whole point of a clean budget upgrade. So how do I actually fit a full-size GPU into a case like this? Well, I went full DIY mode. I had everything ready, a GPU support bracket, a PCIe X16 riser, and the plan was simple. Mount the GPU outside the case. Not pretty, but effective. One thing I absolutely wasn't going to do was cut the case while the hardware was inside. Metal dust and PC components do not get along, so everything came out first. Then came the sketchiest part, figuring out where to cut. And honestly, there's no formula here, no guide, no measurements. This was pure guesswork. I marked the area that needed to go, took a deep breath, and cut it out. At that point, there was no going back. Either this works, or I just permanently modified a Dell Optiplex for no reason. After clearing out everything that was blocking the riser, I finally managed to fit it in. And honestly, I got lucky. One cut, and it fit perfectly. To keep it in place, I used high-quality double-sided tape to secure the riser to the case. Now let me be clear, this is not a long-term bulletproof solution. If you want something more permanent and safer, drilling holes and securing it with screws is absolutely the better move. This is more of a budget modder approach. That said, with this setup, the result is kind of awesome. You can technically mount any GPU you want, yes, even something ridiculous like an RTX 5090. The case is now super easy to work with, and installing or removing parts is way less painful than before. Now, the original configuration was pretty weak, mostly because it only had 8 GB of RAM. So I upgraded that to 16 GB, and for the GPU, I went with a GTX 1050 Ti 4 GB, which I picked up for $50. It's a smart choice here. Low power draw, no external PCIe power needed, and it won't overwhelm the stock PSU. Once everything was installed, I was honestly surprised. The GPU actually became a visual highlight of the whole build. Not bad at all for a Frankenstein setup like this. Looks are one thing though. What really matters is performance. So yeah, enough talking. Let's jump straight into the benchmarks and see what this thing can actually do. I tested everything at 1080p to keep things fair and easy to compare. Starting with Minecraft, after the upgrade it's pushing over 300 FPS. That's roughly 10 times higher than the original setup. Pretty clear the old CPU was the biggest bottleneck here. In GTA 5, performance jumps by about 50 frames per second. It's actually comfortable now, the kind of setup where you just launch the game and play missions without constantly tweaking settings. Moving on to CS2, FPS sits around 100, which is smooth enough for real gameplay. Huge difference compared to before, when the system couldn't even get into the game properly. Cyberpunk 2077 holds around 50 FPS at 1080p. Not perfect, but totally playable if you're willing to dial in reasonable settings. Fortnite runs at roughly 100 FPS, and more importantly, it stays stable during fights. No major drops. And finally, The Witcher 3 lands in the 60 to 70 FPS range, which is solid for an older AAA title that's still pretty demanding. I figured this system still had more potential, so it was time for a serious upgrade. I picked out two of the strongest CPUs you can run on socket 1150. The i7-4790, and the Xeon E3-1241V3. And if you're thinking about doing a similar upgrade, here's my honest advice. Go with the Xeon. Its performance is basically on par with the i7-4790, but it costs around $15, which is almost half the price. The trade-off? The Xeon doesn't have an iGPU. That means a dedicated GPU is mandatory, so I paired it with an RTX 2060 Super 8GB. And yeah, at that point, a separate power supply is non-negotiable. With that setup locked in, I ran all the tests at 1440p to see what this Frankenbuild could really do. Minecraft at 8 chunks stays well above 300 FPS, no problem at all. CS2 on high settings sits just under 60 FPS, right around that sweet spot where the game still looks good and feels smooth enough to play comfortably. Fortnite on low settings is pretty impressive, hovering around 100 FPS, with only minor dips during close fights. Even Cyberpunk 2077 manages about 45 FPS, which is honestly respectable for a game that heavy. And The Witcher 3 hits around 100 FPS, which is basically ideal. Overall, the upgrade makes a night and day difference. If you're running a similar SFFPC, doing something like this is absolutely worth it. Solid performance gains without completely ruining the look of the system.